much for that warm welcome, and it's great to be in South Florida this morning. So welcome everyone to OIC's 2022 Summit. I'm excited to be joined today by an esteemed group of panelists, and we're getting ready to delve into the heart of the issues that really challenge and inspire our times: health, education, funding, and service delivery. Before we begin, I'd like to invite my panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Brevity is a skill set which they've all mastered. So I'm going to start on my right and invite you to please share your name, organization, and what brings you to today's conversation.
Good morning. My name is Sherry Brown Grosvenor. I serve as Vice President of Community Impact at the Community Foundation of Broward. I've served in this role for well over 20 years, and what brings me to this summit is the care, concern, and passion that we as a community foundation have for this community and for uplifting the middle class, as well as all people in this community. Thank you for having us today.
Good morning. Kathleen Cannon, the CEO for United Way of Broward County. I've been in my role 10 years. I'm a social worker by trade, so that's the piece that brings me here as well. And now at United Way, we get to be social workers, but in a macro sense on the entire community. And we're published the Alice Report, which we'll talk a little bit about, but that's our passion here and working with this community. And thank you so much for having me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lorene Shant. I'm President and CEO of the Health Foundation of South Florida. Newbie, I've been in my role just over a year, and before joining the Health Foundation of South Florida, I was the leader of a community-based organization. So I like being able to bring that perspective to the work now as a funder. And at the Health Foundation, we are committed to uplifting the health and well-being of our community, and certainly understanding that economic mobility, access to education, and opportunities underpin the ability to have a healthy community. So thank you for being here. I enjoy looking forward to the panel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Judith Fletcher. I'm a grants manager with the Frederick A. DeLuca Foundation. I'm thrilled to be here to learn the best practices on how to uplift all people in our community. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Juliette Fabian. I'm the Chief Programs Officer at the Children's Trust of Miami-Dade County. Some of you might know Children's Trust as Children's Services Council, depending on which county you live. So I'm here to share from a funder perspective, like what it's meant to us to have equity in education. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining us for today's conversation. So I'm going to invite anyone to chime in with responses to our first question. We know that we've in still the midst of a pandemic, and it has created several market pressures, and we're dealing with new economic realities. And so as we think about what working class Americans, working poor Americans are experiencing, and we think about access to the middle class, I'd love to hear you share how your funding strategies, milestones have adapted to reflect the realities of our changing times.
I'll go if that's okay. So, I mean, dramatic changing times, and it's been changing for quite some time. I think it was about 9 years ago at United Way, so many folks were coming forward for assistance and help that had never come forward before. When you see someone that's homeless, you know that they're in distress and that a series of events took place and that they need help. But folks were coming forward, again, that you didn't show that there was stress and strife, and it was financial stress and strife, not being able to get ahead. So we decided to, through the state, publish this Alice Report. It's called Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. Don't remember that. It's just about studying how many folks in our community, in Broward, but in the state, that are working so hard, the middle class, doing all the right things, but cannot get ahead for no fault of their own. And so we published this report and we decided to program around it with many of the funders that are sitting here and many of you in the community. It's really going to take a community effort. So we decided to really double down on the middle class and the ALICE population, not also with poverty, making sure that folks in poverty were being supported as well. So I think that was the shift for us, really visually realizing that so many folks are coming forward for help who really shouldn't. You know, we are America, and we really should have such a robust, strong middle class. So we really, again, decided to start to publish this and program around it and fund around it. And OIC, you guys stepped up for now 2 decades, but so much so in the last 5 years to eradicate and really assist and help in the middle class.
And then I would jump in from the Health Foundation's perspective. I agree. So much has changed. And so I would say a few things. First of all, immediately, a lot more flexibility and ability and willingness to extend deadlines, convert things that were intended for programs into just core operating support. And I think all of the funders understood the importance of ensuring the funding was there to maintain that ecosystem of community-based organizations that are always first in line when crises hit. The role of community-based organizations cannot be overstated when crises hit, and it's the funders like all of us on this panel that stepped in. Now, from the Health Foundation's perspective, a few things that we've been focused on is working more upstream, which you know that means more dollars invested, more risk, more years at the table, more partners, more complexity. So I would say that that's been a really big shift. We've really been challenged, and if you look at, and we'll talk about it as the panel goes on, one of our areas of focus as the Health Foundation is what we call thriving communities. And that's around economic opportunities and trying to work across the community to solve for some of the challenges. So we have invested more dollars in that pillar in recent years than we had in prior years in response to what's happening in the community. So that's from our perspective.
I'd like to chime in on a point you've raised and invite others to join: more risk. And what does that mean? And many of us, we hear
More
that
stress.
word risk.
That means more stress.
Right, we hear that word risk, and some of us are like excited, and some of us, we get concerned. And so I'd like to talk about the relationship between risk and evidence. And what does it mean, particularly when we have to address financial shifts, certainly changes in our labor market and what it means for our workforce dynamics. The conversation around equity, we're going to delve into the E word this morning. But how has that challenged your perceptions around creating spaces for innovation, for ideation, and yet making sure there's impact, right? There's some shared accountability. So I'd love your thoughts on the relationship between risk and evidence.
So I can chime in here. So there's a couple things. We have really been talking about trust-based philanthropy when we are looking at organizations to fund. And also perhaps making grant periods longer to give grantees the time to really not only implement already strong programs, but perhaps innovative programs. We know that that takes time. Also, one funder in Palm Beach County described it to me like this. She said, when you're really doing innovative work, and that means engaging the community, it's messy. And outcomes are not going to be reported when you think they should be reported. But that goes back to trust. So you still want to know, how is this impacting the community? But it might not be in the set timeline that you're used to.
I'd like to comment, to touch on a little bit about your first question. When the pandemic hit, the pandemic, in our view, it exacerbated problems that already existed in the community. And then you had the collision of the George Floyd that just really pulled the lid off of everything. So as funders, we were dealing with dual pandemics all within a span of about 6 months. So we had to address several different issues from, as Kathleen stated, basic needs. We've never seen people need access to food than we've ever seen in the history of this community. And so as it relates to risk, as funders, because we're stewards of other people's money, whether it's donors or taxpayers, you do have to take calculated risks. But the Community Foundation, this was the first time we totally imploded our model. We gridded the focus areas and focused on the people and the needs. And when you're calculating those risks, you're calculating lives that will be saved, and how many people will be fed, clothed, housed, and taken care of and moved into employment during a time where, everyone feels there's hopelessness. So we kicked into more of an innovation mode. We looked at some of the existing relationships that we had in the community with organizations, had conversations with them, and we developed some really big and bold grant-making strategies, one of which was the Be Bold Prize, which called for big, bold ideas to get people who are chronically unemployed or unemployed due to the pandemic back into the workforce. And we received an amazing response from organizations in this room, and we wound up funding a $1 million prize to Broward College to implement a specific employment connection program that was that's a part of their Broward Up program. So talking about risk, taking to your board $1 million grant proposal was huge. But as Judith stated, you have to trust organizations. I think as funders, we put too many restraints and constraints on organizations who are just trying to do good work out there because we have all of our rules and regulations. But we have to trust, and we have to be willing to accept if a project or an initiative fails, for the lack of a better term. That's what risk is. Risk is about stepping out and moving into a space of the unknown and hoping for a great outcome and being able to set back and do an analysis of why it worked well or why it did not. And I think that's what we all did during this pandemic.
And I just want to add, I'm so sorry.
No, I like to share some thought from the Children's Trust perspective. I think some of the strategies, like we really put a lot of resource and investment for a group of people or families that are like somehow neglected, because we get a lot of application from social service organizations talking about the poorest, the unemployed, and all that. So we get it. We know they need a lot of help. But also, those people might be qualified for more subsidized services already available in our community, because it's easy to connect, well, might be a little bit easy to connect them to services. But a group I feel like we focus a lot on is those people that are working, but they're making a little bit too much not to be qualified for anything, but it's not enough to survive. So how do we support this group of families, right? So what we've been doing, two of our major initiatives are Thrive by Five. We try to provide subsidized childcare. We know some people are already eligible, but what are the ones that's not making, they're making a little bit too much, but not enough to really afford childcare. So we try to support that through our Thrive by Five initiative by offering scholarship for those working families. And also we have our FNS, Family Neighborhood Support Services. We do support some of the families that's struggling making ends meet by, the rent. Let's not talk about housing now. We all know what's going on in our community and how it's very hard for some working family to handle that. We try to do some sort of support there. Yes, we still support the poorest of the poor, but also those group of people usually don't have any access to anything. They're not eligible for anything to provide some resources and support to them.
So I'd like to take the thread of housing. So this panel really includes funders with deep subject matter expertise in health, in education, and you're at the table today really talking about mobility, right? Even from your respective subject areas. And as we think about the challenges that are at times proposed, I'd love your thoughts on interdisciplinary approaches to addressing community economic development issues. And what does it mean really to bolster economic mobility and resilience?
If you don't, I'd love to share a little bit, which is an illustration in response to what you just talked about, because these challenges upstream cannot be solved in silos. And as a funder, what we hear all the time and what we see is so many great things happening, and it's the lack of connectivity that just weakens the potential for transformative change.
That's right.
So the Health Foundation, prior to the pandemic, created what's called the Anchor Alliance, which is a national model that we brought to South Florida and South Florida, meaning it's a little different than the national model. And what that is, it's a collaboration of 20 leading organizations in Broward County and Dade County. So think of your health systems, your university systems, your public school systems, your municipalities, all of them coming to the table to really look at economic mobility in a couple of different ways. So this alliance is focused on two things. One is workforce development. And so this is a group of folks, so the universities are partnering with the health systems and creating pathways to living wage jobs. It started with a blueprint created by the participants, right? So I told you earlier that we've made bigger investments in community, thriving communities. We invested $1 million over the last few months to support the community college, the college system, Broward and Miami-Dade College, to partner with the healthcare systems and create those pathways to those living wage jobs for residents in our community who need opportunity. Really proud of that. The other side, which is very, very exciting, some of you may have heard, another really strong pillar of this Anchor Alliance is around equitable procurement. Understanding the billions of dollars that are being spent by these organizations, and also understanding how difficult it is for local, small, and minority-owned businesses to get their foot in the door, secure a contract, and then if they're so successful, then to secure the capital in order to operationalize, right? So we just invested another $1.2 million in the process by September 1st. We should have all of the agreements signed. We have 8 pilot institutions. Think Broward Health, Broward County Public Schools, Broward College, who was the first to sign the grant agreement, which we're very proud of. There you go. Great partners in Miami-Dade. We're talking about UHealth, University of Miami, FIU, other great organizations. What they're doing, what we've done is we are creating a marketplace. It is an online platform that's going to provide the opportunity for small businesses who are a vendor in one system to be seen by all of the Anchor members, which when you talk to small businesses, that's transformative. It is so difficult to get recognized and have visibility. And then it will also uplift and then artificially attach or connect these small businesses and their profile with those procurement opportunities in these big organizations. So this is the first in the country to go across these sectors. We announced the investment in the spring. We've been working very hard with our partners all summer long, and before the end of this year, we are going to see that marketplace live in South Florida. So that's a great example of taking a national model, making it local, bringing cross-sector collaboration, and really moving money and wealth and opportunity into the local community. So we're very excited. We think it will succeed. We will let you know, right? It is a risk, but we're excited to see what happens, and the partners around the table have been extraordinary.
Great example.
So you mentioned risk before, and I think part of the reason why we're on the panel is because every one of us in our organizations are risk takers. We can't continue to only fund evidence-based. Evidence-based means it's proven, it works. It's important, and that is very important, but we have to also fund promise programs and pilot projects, and we have to interdisciplinary approach to how we fund, how we look, how we measure. So bringing the health system in, bringing the economic mobility organizations in, education. Something that United Way does, and so do the funders here, we partner with the economic development organizations in South Florida. Human services funding this way will not work in a silo if we are not partnering with the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, the Beacon Council, the chambers. Together, we are an economic cycle, an economic engine. I say all the time, United Way and the funders here, we are businesses. We have a tax status as a nonprofit, but it is only a tax status. It is not a paradigm for running a business. And we take that business seriously, and our products are changing lives forever for better. And that means collaborating, taking risks, being bold, being courageous, trying crazy things, looking for advice from others, taking really community conversations together, and how do we make that work? So I think that that's an important piece that all of us bring, because too often funding was very prescriptive. Because we had funders, takes a lot to raise money, so we had funders and we wanted to be good stewards, so we have to make sure every dollar matters and every dollar makes a difference. It takes a long time for a dollar to make a difference, and it takes a long time for true change to take place. So funders, we're getting patient, we're getting innovative, we're not being as prescriptive. And we absolutely have to focus on equity. And we have to put dollars and policy changes in place. And that's another opportunity that I think many of us are working on together and raising the awareness and what we need to do as a community. And I know we're going to talk about housing later because that's a big piece of what's happening here in South Florida that is really holding folks back. But I just wanted to share that piece.
Yeah. I mean, we really didn't rehearse this, but the strands they're leaving makes this such a natural conversation. So I want to pick up your strand around equity. And so when we have these conversations around equity, often they occur in a very value-driven way. And my question to the panel to invite us to discuss for the duration of this summit is the case for equity also makes economic sense, not just a moral responsibility. And so as we think about the composition of South Florida and the opportunity which lies in its dynamism, my question to the panel here is, what strategies should we explore, should we experiment with, should we scale to support diversity, equity, and inclusion to foster economic mobility in this region?
Okay, that's loaded.
I know, how do we solve it? How do we solve all the isms?
Maybe I can jump in on that. So at the foundation, I've been charged with being the DEI strategist, and we use the term READY, racial justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is a really interesting yet challenging conversation, because what we are asking ourselves, as we are asking others to do, is to really take that internal, introspective look at who we are as organizations, how we operate, how we make decisions, how we engage the community in the work that we do to make an impact, right? And so when you look at, okay, what is the barrier, or what are the barriers to equity? The barrier, I think the number one barrier is that we having blinders on and not seeing, or pretending you're not seeing inequity. And the solution is take the blinders off. And when you take the blinders off, what you're going to see are statistics that are quite startling as it relates to populations in our community. People of color, when you look across the spectrum of the issues that you mentioned that we have to thread, right, you'll see that the disparity is really, is very, it just pierces the heart to see it. And one challenges oneself to say, of all the philanthropy that we distribute in the community, what difference is it making? And I think that is a challenge that is before us as funders, and also before our community partners, of the investments that we're making. How are we really closing the gaps, closing the wealth gaps? And what are we doing to measure our activity around those things? You treasure what you measure. So when we look at racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think we have to start internally and examine our organizations. You can't be the preacher of equity and you're not practicing it internally. So you have to look at the makeup of your staff. At the Community Foundation, quite frankly, for a very long time, I've been there over 20 years, I was the sole person of color in the foundation. You look at the foundation now, we have a beautiful complement of staff, and I see our table represented well here of diversity just from a staffing standpoint. Because what you will hear from the community is, well, how do they understand this community if they don't look like me? And I think that's a valid question. Because you have to understand and respect the lived experiences of people that you're trying to aid in the community. And not saying if you're not a person of color, you don't understand that, but you have to bring balance to your approach when you're trying to go into communities and make a difference. So, by example, really quickly, one of the things the foundation has done over the past 2 years is we've initiated a health hub model, and we started in South Broward, and basically boots on the ground, grassroots, bringing residents to the table to explore all the various issues and how they intertwine. And it's quite surprising what you hear from the people who live in communities. Sometimes it's starkly different than what we talk about when we're sitting at our head tables. There's a disconnect there. So when we talk about innovation and models, the key solution moving forward is to get your feet on the ground in communities, talking with the people who are affected by what we do.
I think, Sherry, what you're saying is so true, and I think that foundations can also look at who we're funding. I know we have actually started getting the demographics of the organizations that we're funding to see who is leading them, to make us accountable to who we're funding in the community. Also, I love when funders talk about organizations that want to work with the community, not for the community. And they ask them, what do you want? Not what do you need? And so I think that is such a key point.
Yeah, I would like to share quickly some of our journey toward an equitable, trying to be, because from the start, we know we were not an expert at the Children's Trust. We know, yes, we read about, we know some of the things that's been working and some that's not working, but we have to acknowledge to ourselves, like, we need to work with the expert in our community, the people who know what they're talking about, because we didn't want it to be like, oh, a checkbox, we're doing this and that. Oh, now we have a diverse funded providers or diverse staff. We wanted to really make it a meaningful journey, and we're still learning. We're still in the process of learning. We've been working through this for almost 2 years now. But what I want to say, it's really to be, as an organization, as a funder, like, we try to be vulnerable. We say, hey, we open to people to look at our grant-making process to see, like, do you have any ideas, any feedback? What are some of the barriers you're having? If you're a small CBO, what are some of the issues you're having with us? And tell us. And we were willing to listen, even being criticized sometimes, but it was okay because. And also, we showed them from the feedback we got, we already implement some of that in our grant-making process. One, I would say quickly, I would share with you one of the things we did. So we know, we try to not to, if you're new applicant to the trust, and you don't know our process and our lingo and things like that, we know that can be an issue for you to get a grant. So we say, like, okay, new organization, we're gonna score you differently we create 2 separate pools, one with people that been working with us, so they compete with, we call them renewal applicant versus new to the trust. We put you in a separate pool to remove that barrier because you may not know some of our processes. So that's one quick change we make, and we can see we have a lot of new providers in our community by just making a small change. So what I'm saying, sometimes it's not about, it's some of the answers, like, very simple, and by talking to the community, by talking to people, not just one group, everybody, you listen to them, and you try, if you listen, you wanna make sure you implement some of the ideas they provide in your process.
I'm going to share two quick examples. Data is so important. So a lot of times when we're doing summits, we're talking to the choir. You're sitting here probably because you understand, you get it, you're committed. It's the folks that are not sitting in this room that we have to continue to try to get to. We talked about blinders. We all have bias and we all have blinders. We did our work internally, and you're right, you can't be a preacher and wanted to be a wide ally, but I had to learn a lot about myself to be able to do that and be authentic and genuine in this fight for equity and anti-racism. And now there's this mandate that we can't mandate equity training and anti-racism training, and where we get federal dollars. So we're pushing back on that. We're continuing our training internally, but with the community as well, because we feel that it's the folks that aren't raising their hand. Yeah, I want to learn about this. I really want to understand this equity issue that you're talking about. So if we don't mandate some of these trainings, the folks that are not going to step forward won't get that. So we are trying to make this commitment. It's not been easy, because it's not easy to bring people in who don't want to be part of the conversation, but we're using data. Because it's hard to argue with data, and sometimes people come from the heart with how they want to learn and communicate and educate and make the world a better place, but some people come from data. So we really try to concentrate on the data, and it's hard to argue with that. And one of the things that when COVID hit, some of the data talked about small micro Black, brown owned businesses literally were falling off, like just closing their doors. So we did pivot like everybody else very quickly. We'd put dollars in and we just literally gave money to keep their doors open. Barbershops, small little catering, little mom and pop daycares, etc. But that's where the nimbleness comes from, but also our commitment to continue to try to educate the folks that don't particularly want to be educated, because that's the swing that we have to have if we really want to have everybody on board with, again, equity and anti-racism.
Wonderful. So I want to pivot the conversation to threats. And as we think about foreseeable threats for the middle class, or opportunities to grow the middle class, what actionable solutions do you think are primed that are multi-sector in nature on the threat strands of interdisciplinary approaches that are multi-sector in nature to really help bolster the middle class? Actionable solutions.
So without trying to get political, but it's a little bit hard not to, because policy is going to be one of those things, and legislation is going to be one of the things that I think is a threat, but it could be a possibility. And at United Way, we have a director of public policy, and we try to work that angle as well. So you know that we're a funder, we collaborate, we put in collective impact and new promise and practices. But if we don't also work on the legislative side and the public policy side, that helps the shift happen in a greater way. So being a 501c3, we all know this, we can't lobby, we can't tell people who to vote for, but we can bring issues to the forefront, and how some of that can change if folks will step forward and vote for different folks in our community and in our state and in our country. Now that's a long game. I'm a real sports fan, so sometimes there's the short game and then sometimes there's the long game, and you have to work both of that. You really have to kind of work quickly and myopically in our community to make change, to make equitable change, to put dollars towards specific organizations that are doing this work. But then you have to do the long game too, and you have to really get out, you have to ask people to vote, you have to educate the voters what people are standing for and what they can accomplish, and you have to stay in that game. And it's daunting and it's exhausting, but if you back away, then before you know it, others are in power that don't really believe in the good of all residents and all people.
I couldn't agree more, Kathleen. I think you stated that so eloquently. Yesterday, I was on a 2.5-hour call on advocacy with foundations from around the country. And in essence, they stated exactly what you just stated. So advocacy is certainly a key solution. Some other key solutions that I thought about, number one is when you look at the economics of things, and some of us can just reflect. My son is in here. He's a college student at Florida A&M University, majoring in business, and I totally paid for his education, right? So when you talk about the middle class, I reflect. I don't think I'm middle class because sometimes I feel like it's the funds are bleeding. So for the middle class, we need to look at how do we stop the bleed? And what I mean by that is, how do we help people? And this is a good one for you. How do we help people create more discretionary income? That's something I don't think we touch on enough, because people tend to have just enough in many cases. Sometimes I have just enough to send him that cash out for that week because I'm paying rent, my rent, his rent, So, yes, I'm blessed, I'm in a better position than most. But think about it. You may have family members or people in your circles. Some people just have just enough to get by. So what are we doing as a community to help people create more discretionary income, multiple streams of income? How are we teaching people about investments and closing the wealth gap because they know how to invest in annuities, in understanding compound interest, understanding what it means to have a home-based business where you can get tax write-offs? These are things that we typically do not talk about with the populations that we serve, and we need to change the conversation. Yeah, and I'm super passionate about this because I know the power of having multiple streams of income in having businesses. I know that personally. So we have to change the conversation around that. We also need to look at the millennials. I'm fortunate my son won't come out of college with debt because I'm sacrificing and paying for his education. But there are people in this community and just nationwide, they're drowning in college debt. Who's talking about that? These are people who won't be able to afford the homes. And United Way has a superb initiative that I know Kathleen will talk about. But how are we helping relieve college debt, where you have to make a choice between paying a bill, light bill, and paying your college debt? We need to make that a part of the conversation, because as we enter people into the workforce and we're saying you need more education, who's paying for that, right? And so we need to also look at something, and being someone who's involved in real estate, I'm going to talk to myself. We need to freeze these rents. It's just deplorable that the average rent in Broward County, Kathleen, and we heard it last Thursday from Ralph Stone, $3,000 a month is the average rent in Broward County. I can't afford that. I'll be at Salvation Army.
It's a catastrophe.
It's a catastrophe. So we can't talk about middle-class economic mobility if we're not dealing with economic factors. And that's what it's about. At the end of the day, it's where is the money to help these people survive.
And there's plenty of wealth, and there's a lot of development happening in Broward County, but it is extremely high end. And what we don't have here in Broward County is a law or an ordinance about that whoever's going to build in our community, that 10, 15% of those units, 20% need to have affordability attached to them forever, in perpetuity. That doesn't happen here. It happens in other communities. So we are facing it's close to 200,000 shortage of units that are affordable for our average citizens here. That's 200,000. So how many people are paying, affordability is called when you're spending 30% or less of your income on your housing. There's like 80% of folks here and renters are spending 30% and more. And I think it's 62% are spending 60% and more. So you have no money left over. At United Way, we have a lot of financial prosperity efforts, and we used to say, earn, keep, and grow. We almost had to drop the grow. We can't even help people grow their dollars because there's literally nothing left over. Nothing. Yeah. So affordability, housing affordability is a catastrophe in Broward, in South Florida. But in Broward, we have the widest gap in the entire country. So it's expensive to live in New York and San Francisco, Chicago, et cetera. However, in Broward County, we have the widest gap of our cost of housing and our wages in the country. So if we don't come together as a community with legislation, with putting in new ordinances for new developers and new builders about creating affordability and housing for teachers, healthcare workers, people that we employ, these are folks, the middle class, they run our country, literally. It's who we rely on. It's who runs this country. It is the backbone. And we are literally pricing them out of anything to be able to afford. So we do have this affordability. We've just committed $10 million, and we have to raise at least another 10 or 20 million to even make a dent, but to creating true affordable housing units in Broward County, where folks will pay 30% or less on their income. Then they will have disposable income at the end. And then for our economics folks that are sitting here, it's just economic sense that if we can do this and we can help folks have money left over at the end of a paycheck, they're going to spend it in Broward County. They're going to go buy a car from you. They're going to open a bank account from you. They're going to spend it here in Broward County. The entire county gets better economically. So I want to continue to drive that home to people, that it's not about a handout. Oh, we want to help those folks. No, if we help everybody in our community all rise, and your business will do better. So that is what we're trying to really instill.
This is great. So this is the opening conversation. They're telling me I'm running out of time. So I have one final question, and Kathleen, you answered already the final question. So I'm going to invite the other panelists to give quick round-robin responses. But what is the imperative that we need to address in South Florida, the one thing, and what's your metric to make sure people are actually better off? So the imperative and the metric to assess better off, round robin.
That's a tough question, but I will share with you, for the Health Foundation, we are looking to close the health disparities gap. Full stop.
Yeah.
Our strategies are around economic opportunities, access to healthcare, and also trying to integrate and meet the social needs of those that are struggling in the community, which are really driving the poor health outcomes. For us, it's about reducing health disparities. And then, so that's our metrics. And then tell me the other part, because I know it was a two-part question. What was the other piece? Oh, so the imperative is that the disparities have widened post-pandemic in almost every way, and we see that and we know that, and our metrics is to close those disparities.
I'll go with mix. I would say, and I like to go with the same. We do many complex initiatives, but I'll start with the simple one to share that we know it's hard to change policy. It's hard to do many big things. The structural issues we're having in our community, in our nation, it's not easy to just change them. But one thing we tried through multiple initiatives we try to do, it's really empowering our families to make the smart decision for themselves. One simple idea, like, yes, you may not be able to control rent right now, but you can manage your personal finances a little bit better. We try to incorporate that in our parenting initiative to make sure people know they don't feel like I'm powerless. I still can find a way to manage giving everything that's in front of me. And I know since we're running out of time, I'll stop here.
So one of the major metrics that we're looking at as a foundation is the overall goal that 65% of residents in Broward County will attain some sort of post-secondary degree. And so we are actively funding organizations to ensure that it meets that goal.
Right, I can't answer that with just a singular imperative, because I think the true imperative is giving people hope and letting them know that there are opportunities. So I think it's hope and opportunities are the two imperatives, and I think that's the grounding that we have at the Community Foundation and the work that we do. And you measure that by whether or not people are responding to you. Are you authentic? And do you care enough? And are you passionate enough about what you're delivering and trying to help or provide in the community, that people are responding in a way that's beneficial to them and not you?
Thank you. Do we have time for audience questions? Yes. No, we're out of time. So please join me in thanking this panel. Thank you so much for engaging in the conversation. Please use Guidebook to post your questions, and we'll be sure to try to respond virtually. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the summit.